Welcome, curious minds, to a deep dive into a topic that really challenges how we think about borders, nationality, and, well, global connection. Today we're tackling a pretty big question. Is the idea of one America, uniting the two American continents, is that just a historical fantasy, or could it actually be a future possibility?
Yeah, and our exploration of this really fascinating concept, it's largely shaped by the work of Tyreek Gaynor-Fray. He's a writer who looks at this from, well, all sorts of angles, historical, cultural, geopolitical. And we also get a really insightful personal view because Gaynor-Fray is a dual citizen.
So our mission today is to unpack this dream of continental unity that's actually centuries old. We want to contrast it with the modern reality of, let's face it, fortified borders and rising nationalism, and explore what all of that means for global hierarchies and, maybe most importantly, for human value itself. And yes, we'll definitely get into the complexities of holding dual citizenship in this whole picture. Okay, so let's unpack this. The vision of one America, it's not new, right?
Yeah.
It has these historical roots going way back. Where did it first really take shape?
That's right. I mean, the earliest big push for this kind of unity in Latin America came in the 19th century with Simón Bolívar, the revolutionary leader who fought for independence from Spain. Bolívar had this famous dream of creating a federation called Gran Colombia. That would have been modern-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. His goal wasn't just independence, though. He wanted to forge a really strong, united front against, both external imperialism and the internal fragmentation he kind of saw coming.
Okay, so he had this grand political vision.
Exactly. But while Bolivar was, incredibly successful in liberating huge parts of South America, his political dream for Gran Colombia didn't quite pan out.
Yeah.
By 1831, it had collapsed. There were internal squabbles, huge geographic challenges. The Andes aren't easy to govern across, and just different national interests starting to emerge. But, and this is the key part, even though that specific political project failed, the idea of unity didn't just vanish, it kind of went underground and popped up somewhere else.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me, because this idea, this aspiration, it finds a home in, of all places, sports.
Absolutely. It's kind of amazing. One of the most visible, though maybe not always consciously recognized, symbols of continental unity today comes from Mexican soccer. Club America. It was founded October 12th, 1916, and that date was chosen deliberately, to link with Columbus's arrival in the Americas, a nod to this shared continental thing. And if you look closely at their crest, their logo, it's literally a stylized map of North and South America inside of football. It's a powerful visual symbol, suggesting unity across the whole hemisphere through sport. It's promoting this broader identity.
That's quite a hopeful image, that crest. But the reality that Gaynor-Fray writes about seems, well, starkly different. The U.S.-Mexico border wall feels like the complete opposite of that Club America crest. How does the wall challenge this one America idea?
Oh, profoundly. The wall isn't just concrete and steel, it's a potent ideological symbol, too. It represents this deep divide, and it's rooted in really complex stuff: immigration policy, economic gaps, national security fears. Gaynor-Fray's analysis points out that the big construction push started with the Secure Fence Act back in 2006, and then it really ramped up under President Donald Trump. By 2021, you had something like 700 miles of barriers in place.
700 miles.
Yeah, and the author is clear. These aren't just physical barriers. They're described as being built from fear, division, and nationalism.
So if we're talking about unifying a continent, and we have this massive symbolic structure representing division, what does that say about the feasibility of one America? What are the huge roadblocks?
Well, the wall really underscores the difficulty, doesn't it? If even partial integration faces that kind of physical and ideological pushback, then a full political merger of North and South America seems, well, astronomically harder, near impossible in the foreseeable future. Think about it. You'd need to dissolve dozens of sovereign nations,
Right.
harmonize completely different legal systems, somehow bridge huge language and cultural divides, and maybe the biggest hurdle, tackle the severe, deep-rooted economic inequality between and within these continents. So yeah, the border wall isn't just a line, it's a symbol of how incredibly far we are from Bolivar's or even Club America's vision.
Okay, that makes sense. But this raises another important point you touched on: the wall as a symbol. Beyond just blocking movement, what does it symbolize about global power, about the world order, according to these sources?
Right. Gaynor-Fray argues it's doing more than just securing a border. Historically, big walls, the Great Wall, the Berlin Wall, Israel's barrier, they've always projected power, control, exclusivity.
Okay.
The U.S. border wall kind of follows that pattern, but it sends a very specific geopolitical message today about American dominance, not just military or economic, but territorial. By hardening that southern border, the U.S. is basically saying entry here is a privilege, not a right, and we control it. This reinforces what the author calls geography as destiny. Your proximity to the U.S., seen as this super secure anchor, kind of pulls you into its orbit. It actively shapes a new global hierarchy based on location.
A hierarchy based on geography, so it's like a global seating chart almost. Where you sit relative to the U.S. determines your status. How does this tiered system look in the Western Hemisphere?
That's a good way to put it. Gaynor-Fray lays out a pretty clear hemispheric tier system. Tier 1, obviously, is the United States, the center of power, the most secure. Tier 2 is Canada, almost seen as an extension, really. Shared systems, deep security ties like NORAD for aerospace defense, the USMCA trade deal.
Right, the undefended border.
Exactly.
Okay.
That allows for much easier movement, preferential migration, trade. They're almost like one block in some ways. Then you get Tier 3, which is Mexico. Culturally different, economically distinct, but its sheer closeness and strategic importance give it a higher rank, even though it's also heavily policed and managed by the U.S.
Okay, so proximity matters, even if it's managed.
Definitely. Then Tier 4 is Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. They're often viewed primarily as security challenges or sources of migration, but because they're geographically close, they're actually more relevant to U.S. border policy than, say, distant allies. Tier 5 is where you find traditional allies like Europe and East Asia, the UK, Germany, Japan, South Korea. Powerful, yes, but geographically removed. Their influence is more filtered through economic and tech ties.
And the last tiers.
Tier 6 is essentially the rest of the global south. Sub-Saharan Africa, large parts of South America, further down, Southeast Asia. They're distant in geography and therefore in influence, generally excluded from the kind of border privileges, trade focus, or migration pathways seen higher up the tiers.
Wow, that really lays out a stark picture. And the sources mention this affects psychological legitimacy and has institutional ripple effects. What does that mean in practice?
Yeah, the psychological legitimacy part means countries like Mexico, being right there, effectively become gatekeepers for U.S. migration policy. They absorb a lot of the pressure. Whereas Canada, with its peaceful border and similar systems, is seen as an unquestioned, almost automatic ally.
Okay.
And the institutional ripple effects, that's about actual policy. Immigration rules start favoring nations that are closer geographically or maybe perceived as culturally aligned. Military alliances like NORAD or aspects of USMCA might implicitly prioritize hemispheric neighbors, sometimes even over older alliances like NATO in certain contexts. And foreign aid can shift too, focusing more on regions critical for border control rather than maybe broader development goals further afield.
Okay, so connecting this all back to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
The sources make this really provocative claim. The border wall reflects this profound shift where nationality is increasingly determining human value.
Is that saying your passport basically dictates your worth now? It's a really stark argument, and yes, that's the core of it. The author contends the wall symbolizes this growing disparity in how human worth is perceived. Being born north of that line often means access to opportunity, legal protection, a certain geopolitical privilege. Being born south, increasingly, in the logic of these systems, it's associated with illegality, poverty, maybe a lesser standing, morally or civically. So nationality stops being just a legal fact and becomes, fundamentally, a kind of moral or social classification.
And this isn't just a U.S.-Mexico thing.
No, Gaynor-Fray points out other examples. Hungary building fences against Serbia, India with Bangladesh, Israel's barriers concerning Palestinian territories. While security is often the stated reason, these walls undeniably send a message that some lives, based purely on where they start, are considered more worthy of protection, inclusion, and opportunity than others.
So citizenship really does become a lottery then, and basic human rights become conditional on where you happen to be born. That sounds like a serious erosion of universal principles.
That's exactly the implication. The author argues that people like refugees or children in unstable countries or migrants just seeking work, they often get criminalized just because of their origins. Their nationality becomes like a scarlet letter determining their fate. And this obviously undermines basic humanitarian ideas. It fosters resentment. It hinders cooperation globally. And it's just tragic because, talent and potential aren't limited by lines on a map.
Right.
A kid born in Honduras has the same potential as a kid born in Texas, but the wall and the system it represents effectively denies that. Now, the author does acknowledge sovereign rights nations can control immigration, but the crucial question Gaynor-Fray raises is how borders are used. Are they tools for exclusion that deny human worth? Or could they be tools for shared governance and dignity?
This is all pretty heavy theoretical stuff in some ways, but it becomes very personal when you consider the author's own experience as a dual citizen. How does that perspective shed light on the challenges of unity?
It brings it right down to earth. From Gaynor-Fray's viewpoint, even trying to truly unite just Canada and the U.S., two countries that seem so similar, share the longest undefended border, trade deals, values. Even that would be incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Because you still have major differences on big things, healthcare, gun control, social safety nets.
Sure.
So if that's hard, then adding Mexico and then the rest of Latin America with all the huge linguistic, cultural, political, infrastructure, economic differences, Gaynor-Fray basically says full unification is almost unimaginable without like decades or even centuries of groundwork.
And there's another really surprising point the author makes, that having a second passport, especially for Americans, isn't always the golden ticket you might think. There are actually hurdles, even threats. What are those?
Yeah, this was fascinating. It kind of flips the script. Gaynor-Fray details several issues for Americans holding second passports, particularly from nearby places like Canada, Mexico, or Europe. First, just systemic barriers. Getting citizenship anywhere is hard. For Americans seeking a second one, it's often a very narrow, very expensive path requiring maybe millions in investment. And for foreigners trying to get U.S. citizenship, even harder, often needing like $10 million investment and waits up to 30 years, citizenship is treated like a fortress.
Okay, so it's guarded.
Highly guarded.
Yeah.
Then there's discrimination. Gaynor-Fray specifically mentions that racial bias can creep into immigration policy, with Black applicants sometimes facing more scrutiny or delays even after they've naturalized. Religion can play a role too. Economically, there's a really potent phrase used, indirect enslavement. This describes situations where immigrants might get trapped by huge fees or exploitative work conditions where their economic output is basically the only thing valued. It's almost like modern indentured servitude.
Oh.
And interestingly, during wartime, a low-income American might still hold social precedence over a wealthy foreigner simply because of the backing of U.S. military power. And finally, dual nationals can face suspicion from authorities, maybe some envy, questions about their loyalty or the advantages they have.
Yeah.
Though on the flip side, Gaynor-Fray does note that holding, say, a Canadian or Mexican passport can sometimes confer value precisely because it's seen as part of this potentially larger, greater North-South American entity, drawing envy from people outside that sphere. It's complicated.
It sounds incredibly complex. So given all this, the history, the walls, the personal challenges, is there any practical path forward for the One America idea? Does Gaynor-Fray offer any kind of alternative vision?
Yes, definitely. The suggestion isn't for a total merger, which seems unrealistic. Instead, the author proposes a Pan-American federation. Think something loosely modeled on the European Union, maybe?
Okay, like the EU, how would that work?
Well, the benefits could be significant. You could have much freer movement of labor, students, tourists across the continents. Imagine huge, common infrastructure projects connecting cities, energy grids, transportation networks from Canada down to Argentina. Joint environmental initiatives would be crucial, especially for managing shared resources like the Amazon rainforest or the Arctic.
That makes sense.
And shared funding for research and education could lift everyone up. The key idea, Gaynor-Fray emphasizes, is that this respects national sovereignty. Countries keep their identities, but they align their goals for collective benefit.
So unity through cooperation, not necessarily assimilation. Building bridges, not walls, essentially.
That's a perfect way to put it.
This deep dive really lays bare that tension, doesn't it, between this persistent dream of continental unity and the very stark realities of borders and national identity we see today.
Absolutely. And the border wall emerges as more than just physical. It's a powerful symbol of this growing global stratification where your geography, your nationality increasingly dictates your perceived value and your access to basic privileges.
And the insights from Tyreek A Gaynor-Fray, especially bringing in that dual citizen perspective, they really underscore just how complex this all is. From those huge historical ambitions down to, very personal lived experiences.
Right. And as we all face these massive shared global challenges, climate change, inequality, migration, the path forward really seems to demand we rethink what borders mean. Maybe not as these hard barriers that assign or deny worth, but perhaps as tools for shared governance, for protection, and for ensuring dignity for everyone, no matter where their journey started.
So what really stands out to you listening to all this? Do you think something like a Pan-American Federation, as appealing as it sounds, could ever truly overcome the deep nationalisms and the huge economic gaps we've talked about? Or are those divisions just too entrenched right now? Definitely something to mull over as you think about your own connections across borders, whether lines on a map or maybe just ideological ones.